So delays, I think, are the most common thing that are happening. We kind of alluded to that a second ago. We were told at one point the priority for the leasing staff were to work on projects that are in design and construction. That seems to be up for debate in different regions, but that was the kind of the memo that we had received, essentially, was that that's where the priority was going to be. There's tons of delays. We've seen lease buyout requests for leases that were already signed. We've worked through, and this has happened a couple of times on projects that I've worked on. We've gone all the way through the design process and pricing, get to a fair and reasonable on our TICS table, the tenant improvement cost summary. It shows all of our pricing broken out in the format that's required for the lease. And then they'll come back, and whenever they're trying to secure their funding to issue a notice to proceed, they'll say, hey, we actually don't have the money or the need anymore for this office. We only, we had 16 people that were going to work here. We're down to a half a dozen. We don't need the office anymore. So there's issues like that are happening across the country, and landlords are trying to figure out, how do I navigate this? There's really no default of the government paragraph, from my understanding, in the lease. The big caveat here, whenever folks are facing a lease buyout, is get an attorney involved. That's my big takeaway there, is make sure you have the proper representation. I think that's an underlying message of everything that we're saying. But these lease buyout requests are happening as well, and then it creates disputes between a landlord and the government, and how are they going to be able to buy out of the lease. And if they are moving forward with the lease, it's these huge delays, not having personnel in place, months and months of delays where landlords are just stuck holding the bag of their carrying costs with no real foreseeable remedies to be able to help with that.
It's also just the cost of time when it comes to construction. The project that you and I worked on, Brian, we had to write into our TICS that as an alternate, that the longer that you delayed notice to proceed on the TICS, the less we could control the price. And so the agency in that particular instance was very concerned about cost escalation due to uncertainty around the tariffs at the time. And because it could really have put them above approved amounts for spending for that project. And so if that particular agency can't get certainty from the GSA about when they're going to make a decision, that leaves them in limbo. And then from the lessors and the lessors team that represents the lessor, from our side of it, we're trying to predict what steel's going to cost, and copper and aluminum and HVAC's controls and lighting controls, and it's impossible to do. So you end up having to take a very conservative estimate of what you think is going to happen, which then time kills deals, because nobody can control cost escalation, and it creates too much uncertainty. And I think that we're seeing a lot of that because there's no leadership. A lot of times I go into projects and I say, who is the decision maker? Ultimately, who is going to decide if we present options, or the design team presents options, we present costs, who's going to decide if we're going to move forward with this, we're going to go do something different? And I think from my point of view, what I'm seeing is there's no one in charge. No one is making a decision, and things are just left in limbo.
Just to add on to that, I mean, unfortunately, delays in the post-award. So what we're the section of the process we're talking about now is the lease has been executed. Now we're in the design and construction phase. So everything's kind of locked in stone at this point. And, delays have been part of this, the leasing process, the government leasing process, since the beginning of time, it seems like. But the reality, I think that Matt and Brian are speaking to, is the fact that it is getting worse, and it's getting worse. It's not necessarily a competency issue at GSA. Or whatever federal agency we're working with. It's becoming a staffing issue, and they have been, as Matt and Brian, very aptly pointed out during the Doge portion of this conversation, it wasn't just real estate and leases that got affected. I mean, it was the manpower at GSA was just wiped out, and entire divisions, entire stovepipes within the organization were left, for lack of a better term, they were broken. The agency as a whole is broken today. They're preparing for a reorganization that was just it's been known for a while, but the actual date of it happening has just been announced. So they're moving forward with this reorganization to essentially start the rebuilding process. But at the time of this recording, we are dealing with a broken GSA. but it's a broken GSA where, literally you have people there who are, they're doing their very best. I mean, we're hearing of project managers who are, dealing with 30 to 50 projects on top of maybe other duties as supervisors or whatever other duties they may have. Now, empathy for that is important to understand, what's happening on the other side of the table. But there's also the side of the other side of the coin, which is, empathy only can go so far when there's massive financial implications to this agency being broken. And it wasn't the fault of the people who were generally dealing with on the other side of the table. This is something that was largely done to them. But at the same time, everyone, again, on both sides of the transaction needs to understand there's real problems with this, and time creates a lot of costs, whether it's through increased, cost of, the labor market or, cost of construction materials, whatever it is. But then there's also the cost of, just carrying an asset and not getting the revenue that should have been started already, based on the timelines in the lease. So it's always been a complicated process going into post-award. I heard, Matt refer to it earlier as, kind of a minefield. Just funny because that's exactly how I always describe, post-award. It is an active minefield, and you need expertise in navigating, really what I think is it's a time in the process of underappreciated risk. And, if you don't have the right team around you, that risk grows exponentially, which I think is the importance of surrounding yourself with a team like this, not only pre-award, so as you're going through lease negotiations and you're putting the deal together, but also post-award as you're navigating the design and construction phase of the process. It almost becomes more difficult once the lease is signed, because at that point, the terms they're like I said, they're locked in stone, but the timeline can fluctuate wildly, which is why you need expertise on your side.